Letters across ice pulls you in before you blink. You feel a note pressed into your own hand. You feel frost biting through the paper. The Victorian cold season in this story hides nothing. It holds secrets you sense as if they belong to you. Every letter carried across frozen ground risked loss. Every message whispered fear or hope. One wrong step in the dark turned life. People waited for words from sons, daughters, lovers, parents, and friends while ice cut across long roads. Some letters froze hard in locked satchels. Some reached doors at the last breath of winter light. This story reaches toward you with a question in the cold. What message sits inside your own waiting hands tonight? Let me bring you to a quiet Victorian winter. A woman named Clara lived alone near the edge of a long road where travelers passed only on rare days. Her husband worked far away, sending letters that moved across ice and frostbitten miles. Storms broke supply routes. The mail rider fought snow each night. Clara warmed her small cottage with thin wood, nursing a cough that rose when wind slipped through loose boards. She waited for one letter with steady hope. The cold season pressed hard. Frozen paths blocked neighbors from reaching her door. Yet she kept her lamp near the window, guiding any weary traveler who needed rest. Winter shaped each breath they took. Before you settle deeper, let me greet you. Tell me where you watch from and the hour on your clock. Pull your blanket higher. Let your breath fall slow. Let your hands rest in warmth. Take a moment for yourself before we move through this story. If this quiet brings peace, press like, press subscribe, and whisper a small note in the comments so I know you shared this night with me. Snow pressed against Clara's cottage before dawn. The wind moved low across the fields with a steady hiss that reached through every crack in the wood. Clara woke to the sound of branches brushing the roof. Her breath rose in thin pale clouds as she sat up in her narrow bed. She touched the side of her throat. The cough rested there, quiet for the moment. She pushed the blanket aside and stepped onto the floor. The boards felt cold enough to sting her feet. She wrapped her shawl tight, lit a small lamp, and walked toward the stove. The last pieces of wood from the night lay in faint red glow. She lifted one small log from the basket and placed it on the coals. It caught slow, sending soft light around the room. Clara stood there for a long moment, letting the warmth reach her fingers. Her eyes moved to the shelf beside the window. Several letters lay there, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Letters from her husband, letters filled with simple words about long days of work, long nights of travel, small meals, cold soil, distant roads, and quiet longing. Clara had read each one many times, holding them as if they carried warmth. She touched the ribbon and whispered, "I wait for one more." The cough rose again. She pressed her hand to her chest and waited for it to pass. When it eased, she filled a small tin cup with warm water from the pot near the stove. The warmth soothed her throat, though only for a moment. Outside, the snow thickened. Clara moved to the window and wiped frost from the glass with the edge of her sleeve. She looked toward the long road that ran past her cottage. No tracks, no shadows, no movement, only white ground stretching toward the ridge. She stepped away from the window and pulled on her boots. She needed to check the hen house before the snow grew deeper. She wrapped a scarf around her head, lifted her lantern, and pushed open the door. Cold air brushed her face with force that nearly took her breath. She steadied herself and walked toward the small structure near the side of the cottage. Her boots sank with each step. The snow held a crisp crust on top, but her weight broke through it. She whispered to herself, slow steps. The hens clucked softly when she entered. Their breath filled the cold air with faint white puffs. Clara reached into the feed sack and filled their trough. She checked each corner for drafts. They looked safe enough for now. When she stepped outside again, she saw a thin line of smoke rising from her own chimney. It eased her worry. She hated leaving the house alone when the fire sat low. She turned toward the road again. A faint shape moved far off. She squinted. A rider. A dark horse. A hunched figure gripping the reins against the wind. The mail satchel hung at the rider's side. Clara felt her pulse lift. She stood still, waiting. The rider moved slow, each hoof sinking deep into the snow. Clara held her lantern higher. The rider raised a hand in greeting. She walked toward the fence. The rider stopped in front of her, breath rising in heavy plumes. "Morning," the rider said. His voice sounded rough from cold. "Hard walk today." "You traveled long," Clara replied. He nodded and pulled the satchel toward the front of the saddle. He opened the flap and took out several letters. He sorted through them with stiff fingers. Clara waited. Breath held at last. He pulled one letter wrapped in a thin strip of twine. The handwriting on the front made Clara's knees weaken. "It reached the post 2 days ago," the rider said. "I fought the storm to bring this round." Clara reached for the letter with both hands. "Thank you. If weather holds, I return again by week's end. If the ridge closes, I return once I can." She nodded. "Stay warm." He tipped his head. "Your lamp helps travelers." He turned his horse and moved on with slow, careful steps. Clara stood there until he faded into the falling snow. She held the letter close to her chest, as if it held heat. She walked back inside the cottage and shut the door against the wind. She stood near the stove and held the letter over the faint glow of the coals. The corners had gathered frost. She brushed them with her thumb. The handwriting carried her husband's steady lines. He always wrote with patience, shaping each letter with care. She untied the twine and opened the fold. She read the first lines with slow breaths. He wrote of long nights at the worksite. He wrote of cold ground that cracked under iron tools. He wrote of roads blocked by ice. He wrote of sickness that affected several workers. He wrote that he longed for home. He wrote that he hoped to travel before the next month ended. If weather allowed, Clara closed her eyes for a moment. Relief filled her chest with a slow, warm rise. She read the letter again from the start. Every sentence felt like a hand resting on her shoulder. She set the letter beside the others on the shelf, then paused. She lifted it again and placed it on top. She wanted it close. She spent the next hour tending her small tasks. She mended a torn glove. She brushed loose snow from the threshold. She checked the window frames for drafts. She prepared a thin stew of potatoes and herbs. She kept the lamp near the window in case any other traveler needed direction. As the day grew older, the wind shifted. Snow fell in softer flakes now, drifting sideways. Clara stepped outside to gather a few small branches from the woodpile. She steadied herself in the deep snow and looked down the road once more. No riders, no travelers, only an empty path waiting for Thor. She turned back to her tasks, but a faint sound drew her attention. A soft knock at the side of her cottage. She stepped around the corner and found a young boy standing near her door, his cheeks red from cold. He held a small wooden box in his hands. "I lost my way," he said with a trembling voice. The storm hid the marker post. I walked until my feet hurt. Clara opened her door. Come inside. The boy nodded and followed her. His boots dripped small puddles across the wood floor. She helped him remove his coat and brought him to the stove. You warm yourself, Clara said. He held his hands toward the fire. My mother sent me to look for kindling. I walked too far. Clara checked his fingers. Your hands stay cold, but safe. You sit here. I prepare warm water. She filled a cup and handed it to him. He drank with slow sips. What is your name? Clara asked. Henry, the boy replied. Clara smiled. I know your mother. She helped me repair my garden fence last spring. Henry nodded. She waits for me. The snow grows deep, Clara said. But we walk together when you rest a bit. Henry looked at the wooden box he carried. I gathered small pieces before I lost the path. You worked hard, Clara said. He looked toward the window. Thank you for letting me warm myself. You stay until your strength returns, Clara replied. Henry rested for nearly an hour. He watched the stove flame rise from the log, Clara added. He stared at the letters on the shelf with a thoughtful tilt of his head. Who wrote those? He asked. My husband, Clara said. Where is he? Far away. He works on the new road. Henry lowered his gaze. My father worked there once. Clara nodded. Many worked there. Henry looked toward the shelf again. Letters help. They do, Clara said. When Henry felt steady again, Clara helped him into his coat and scarf. She lifted her lantern and opened the door. Stay at my side, she said. Henry nodded. They walked through the snow toward the cluster of cottages on the far side of the bend. The path felt safe with Clara's lantern casting soft light. Henry walked close, carrying his wooden box under one arm. When they reached his home, his mother rushed out, tears rising in her eyes. She hugged Henry tight and pressed her face to his hair. Thank you, she said to Clara. He wandered off when the wind shifted. He stayed brave, Clara said. Henry's mother touched Clara's arm. Come inside for a moment. Warm yourself. Clara shook her head. My stew waits. The stove needs tending. You walk safe, Henry's mother said. Clara lifted her lantern and stepped back toward her own cottage. The snow crunched under her boots. The sky above had lost its harsh grey tone. A soft silver hue replaced it. When she reached her door, she felt her cough rise again. She leaned against the frame until it passed. Then she stepped inside and added another log to the stove. Her eyes moved toward the letter on the shelf. She lifted it once more, reading it for comfort. The day passed slow. The snow outside thickened again. The wind returned in short bursts. Clara checked the windows each hour and stirred her stew. She thought of her husband on a distant road. She thought of the rider who carried letters through storms. She thought of Henry's small hands lifted toward her fire as evening settled. She lit her lamp and placed it near the window. The soft glow spread through the dark room. She sat near the stove with the letter resting in her lap. She whispered, I wait for your footsteps. The wind brushed the walls as the night continued its slow rise. Clara woke in the night with the sound of the wind pushing hard against the west wall. Her throat felt tight. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders and listened for any loose boards that needed tending. The stove still held a faint glow, though the fire had slipped low. She rose slow, placed 2 small logs inside, and waited for the flame to rise again. When it caught, she held her hands in front of it until her fingers warmed. The cottage felt still. The snow outside moved in soft hisses along the edges of the door. Clara lifted her lamp and walked to the window. She wiped frost from the glass with her sleeve. Only darkness waited outside. No tracks, no distant lanterns, no sign of travelers. She pressed her hand to the glass for a moment. Cold settled through her palm. She whispered, "Tomorrow brings clearer skies." She hoped her words carried truth. Clara sat in her chair near the stove and lifted her husband's letter again. She read it through twice, letting each line settle. His steady script eased her. She traced one line near the middle where he wrote he longed for warmth. Her chest tightened. She knew that feeling. She lived with it each day. As dawn neared, a pale band of light formed along the horizon. Clara stepped outside to gather more wood. The air cut sharp against her skin, but the storm had slowed during the last hour. She looked toward the road. Snow lay deep across it, smooth and untouched. She shoveled a small path to reach the woodpile. She moved slow, steady, keeping her breath measured. With a basket full of wood, she returned inside and set it near the stove. She kept the largest logs for night. The smaller ones would serve through the day. As the fire strengthened, Clara warmed water for her tea. She sat at the table and sipped slow, letting the warmth settle in her throat. A knock sounded at her door. God! Clara stiffened. She was not used to visitors this early. She set her cup down and walked to the door, keeping her steps quiet. When she opened it, she found Henry's mother standing outside with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "I hoped you were awake," she said. Clara nodded. "Please, come inside." Henry's mother entered and brushed snow from her coat. "I brought soup. You gave time and care yesterday. I wish to give something in return." Clara lifted the cloth from the pot. "You did not need to walk here in the cold." "I wished to," Henry's mother said. "My son slept deep. He told me how you helped him." Clara set the pot near the stove. "He stayed brave. He thinks you hold warmth in your hands," Henry's mother said with a soft smile. Clara felt her cheeks warm. "I try to keep the fire steady." Henry's mother looked around the cottage. "Your home feels safe." "I try," Clara said again. The woman stepped closer. "A rumor reached me. The rider said the road behind the ridge might close for several days soon. Another storm forms past the hills." Clara frowned. "He told me he returns by week's end, but storms change his path." Henry's mother nodded. "If the storm rises, let us stay where they rest." Clara thought of her husband's next message. She touched the ribbon around the stack of letters. "Then we wait longer." "We wait often in winters," Henry's mother said. Clara walked to the stove and ladled a little soup into a bowl. She handed it to Henry's mother. "Warm yourself before you walk back." The woman sipped slow. "Your kindness spreads," she said. Clara shook her head. "Your gift warmed my morning." Henry's mother finished her soup, wrapped her coat again, and lifted the empty bowl. "You come visit when the snow softens." "I will," Clara said. The woman stepped outside. "You keep your lamp lit. It guides us." Clara watched her walk away, the snow rising in small puffs around her boots. She closed the door and leaned against it. The room felt quiet again. Hours passed. Clara tended her chores with slow care. She mended a tear in her shawl. She swept the floor. She stepped outside several times to shake snow from the roof's low eaves because heavy drifts weighed them down. She kept her lantern lit through the afternoon as shadows thickened. As dusk neared, Clara prepared supper. She ate slowly, letting each bite settle. She checked the windows for frost, adding extra cloth to the bottom edges. She looked toward the shelf again, lifting her husband's letter and reading it once more. The words helped her breathe. Later that evening, she stepped outside with her lantern. The air felt still. She walked toward the road. The wind no longer howled. Snow fell in small, drifting flakes. She paused near the fence where the rider had handed her the letter that morning. She whispered, "Let him stay safe." Her breath drifted across the snow. As she turned back toward her cottage, a faint shape moved along the road. A man on foot, his steps slow, his head bent. Clara lifted her lantern higher. He stumbled once. She rushed toward him. "Sir," she called, her voice soft but firm. He lifted his head. His face looked pale under frost. His coat held clumps of snow. His gloves were torn. "I saw your lamp," he said with a strained voice. "I needed direction." Clara stepped beside him and offered her arm. "You come inside before the cold takes your strength." He nodded and leaned on her as they walked toward the cottage. Inside, she guided him to the stove. He loosened his coat with shaking hands. "I lost the road markers near the ridge," he said. "The storm confused my steps." Clara brought him warm water. "Sip slow. You are safe now." He drank with trembling lips. His eyes softened. "Thank you." She checked his hands for frost. "You stayed outside too long." "I tried to reach the town before night settled," he said. "Supplies rest in my cabin. My wife waits." Clara nodded. "You rest here until you feel steady." He breathed slow, letting the warmth reach him. He looked around the room. "Your lamp guided me. Without it, I lose my way entirely." Clara sat across from him. "It guides any traveler who needs it." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Winter tests us." Clara agreed with a small nod. He opened his eyes again. "Your husband lives here." "He works on the road far south," Clara said. The man lowered his gaze. "Then you wait alone through storms." "I wait with hope," she replied. He gave a weak smile. "Hope keeps us alive in seasons like this." Clara tended the stove and filled her kettle again. She watched the man's breathing slow and steady. She brought him a blanket. He draped it around his shoulders with gratitude. "I sleep here on the chair," she said. "You take the bed tonight." "You need rest." "I cannot." "You need it," Clara said in a steady tone. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I thank you." Clara prepared the bed with extra blankets. She guided him toward it. He lay down with a sigh. "Sleep," Clara said. He closed his eyes. Clara sat near the stove for a long while. She listened to the quiet breathing from the bed. She kept the lantern near the window in case any other lost traveler needed direction. The wind eased through the night. The stove crackled. Snow brushed the window frames. Clara held her husband's letter in her lap. She traced the curve of his handwriting with her fingertip. She whispered softly, "You are safe." "I feel it." Her eyes grew heavy. She leaned in her chair, letting the fire warm her feet. The cottage rested in stillness. The traveler slept. The night settled without harsh storms. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of frost drifting through the window seam. The traveler sat near the table, his blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "You wake early," Clara said. "I slept better than I thought," he replied. She prepared warm water and handed him a cup. "Your strength returns." He drank slow. You saved me. I offered warmth. Clara said. You saved yourself by walking toward the lamp. He smiled faintly. I want to repay you. You repay me by reaching your wife, Clara replied. The man stood. His legs trembled, but he stayed upright. He put on his coat and scarf. The town lies 1 mile ahead, Clara said. The path slopes down. He nodded. Your kindness lives long in my memory. You walk safe, she said. He stepped outside. Clara watched him until he reached the bend in the road. His figure faded between the trees. She stepped back inside, closed the door, and let the warmth of the stove rest against her. She held the letter again. The snow outside sparkled under morning light. Clara whispered, I wait for the next message. Clara woke with a tight ache in her chest. She pressed her palm against her shawl and breathed slow until the feeling eased. The stove held a thin line of ember from the night. She added small scraps of pine first, waited for them to glow, then placed a thicker log on top. The room warmed with slow patience. A pale band of light drifted through the frosted window. Clara wiped the glass and looked toward the road. The traveller from the night before had reached the bend safely. She hoped he reached the town without struggle. Snow stretched across the ground in smooth layers. The air felt still, as if winter held its breath. Clara wrapped her scarf round her head and stepped outside. The cold settled onto her cheeks at once. She walked toward the henhouse with careful steps. The snow rose high enough to reach her knees now. She cleared a small path with her boot and checked the latch. The hens stirred when she entered. She fed them and murmured soft words to keep them calm. When she returned to the cottage, she brushed snow from her skirt and hung her shawl on a peg. The fire had grown stronger. She filled her tin cup with warm water and sipped. Her cough lingered faintly, but did not pull hard on her lungs this morning. She reached for her husband's letter again. She lifted it slow, feeling the slight stiffness of the paper. She read the lines she knew by heart. His words moved through her with steady warmth. He wrote of frozen soil, long walks, careful work, and a longing for her presence. She traced the edge of the letter before placing it back on the shelf. Clara tended her morning tasks with steady rhythm. She swept near the door, tightened a loose hinge, folded extra cloth to block drafts from the window frames, and stirred a small pot of oats on the stove. She moved without rush, letting each movement settle her thoughts. A knock sounded at her door. The sound made her pause. Few travelled this far in winter unless they needed warmth or direction. She crossed the room and opened the door. Henry stood there again, his hat dusted with snow. Good morning, Clara said. You walk early, Henry nodded. My mother asked me to bring this. He lifted a small basket wrapped with cloth. Warm bread. Clara smiled. Step inside. Your cheeks hold more red than they need. Henry entered and stamped snow from his boots. Clara set the basket on the table and lifted the cloth. The bread steamed slightly. The scent filled the small room. I thank your mother, Clara said. Henry shrugged. She thinks you keep light in this cold season. Clara tilted her head. I keep my lamp lit for travellers. Most people turn their lamps away from the window in storms, Henry said. You turn yours toward the road. Clara nodded. Someone once did the same for my husband when he travelled in his youth. Henry touched the table edge with small fingers. Did he follow the light too? He did, Clara said. A farmer's wife kept a lamp burning through long nights. He always spoke of it. Henry sat on the small stool near the stove. I want to help today. Clara raised her brow. Help with what? Henry pointed at her shovel, leaning near the door. I help clear the path. You walk through snow deep enough to exhaust you, Clara said. Henry straightened his shoulders. I ate well. I feel strong. Clara studied him for a moment. His face carried earnest determination. She nodded. Then we clear together. Henry grinned. They stepped outside. The snow reached higher than before, thick and packed near the corners of the cottage. Clara handed Henry the smaller shovel and kept the larger one for herself. They worked slow. Henry pushed snow aside with effort. Clara cleared the heavier drift nearest the door. The air felt sharp, but sunshine reached the ground in soft glow. The sky looked lighter than past days. Clouds thinned, giving small glimpses of pale blue. Henry paused to catch his breath. Snow grows taller each day. Storms feed the land, Clara said. But too much strains us. Does the rider still come? Henry asked. He tries, Clara said. Weather decides his path. Henry nodded with grave understanding. Snow decides much. They continued clearing until a neat line formed from the door to the fence. Clara looked toward the road and froze. Footprints. Not Henry's, not hers. Not the travelers from the night before. Fresh footprints, leading toward her cottage. Her breath tightened. Someone passed here before we woke, she said. Henry stepped beside her. Do you know who? Clara shook her head. The prints look from early dawn. The footprints moved from the road to her fence, then toward the side of her cottage. Clara followed them with careful steps. Henry stayed close. The tracks led toward her window. The window where she kept her lamp during storms. Clara knelt beside the snow. The print shapes stayed clear. Deep, firm. Did they knock? Henry asked. No, Clara said. She looked around but saw no other signs. No dropped items. No broken branches. No stray cloth. Only those footprints. Maybe they left a message. Henry said with quiet hope. Clara walked to her door and checked the latch. It remained tight. She stepped inside and looked round the cottage. Everything stood in place. No sign of disturbance. She breathed slow and eased her shoulders. Perhaps someone sought direction and left when they found none. Henry nodded, but still looked troubled. Clara offered him warm water. He sat at the table and held the cup with both hands. You helped enough for today, Clara said. Your mother waits. Henry stood and lifted the basket cloth from the bread. Eat this while it stays warm. I will, Clara said. He walked to the door. If you see more footprints, tell me. Clara smiled. I will. He stepped outside. His boots pressed new tracks beside the older ones. Clara watched him until he reached the bend. She closed the door and leaned against it. Her cottage felt safe, warm, still, but those footprints stirred something uneasy. She moved to the window and looked at the road. A faint shape moved at the far edge. A rider, but not the male rider. This horse looked smaller. The rider hunched forward, clutching the reins. Clara kept her gaze steady. The rider passed without stopping, their head lowered, their pace slow. They moved toward the ridge, disappearing behind the rise. Clara sighed. She stepped back, wrapped her shawl tighter, and placed the kettle on the stove. She held the bread Henry brought and broke off a piece. The warm crust softened her mood. As she ate, a sound reached her ears. A A soft tapping. Not at the door. Not at the window. Somewhere behind the cottage. She set the bread down and stepped outside again. The wind brushed her face. Snow fell in thin veils around her. She moved toward the back of the cottage. A small satchel hung from a nail near the woodpile. Clara froze in place. She reached for the satchel with slow hands. The leather felt stiff from frost. She opened it. Inside lay a folded note. Her breath hitched. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting did not belong to her husband. It belonged to someone else. The script ran uneven, as if written fast or in worn hands. Your lamp saved me from freezing. I leave this message in thanks. I travel without rest. I ask forgiveness for passing without knocking. I feared waking you. I owe you my life. No signature. Clara read it twice. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with a strange, quiet weight. The visitor from dawn had taken her light as a guide. He had watched from her window, seen the glow, and survived because of it. She folded the note and placed it inside her apron. She carried the satchel inside and set it beside the stove to dry. The silence of the cottage shifted. It no longer felt empty. It felt held. Clara sat in her chair and let the fire warm her feet. Hours passed slow. The snow settled into soft mounds. Clara prepared stew, sorted fresh logs, and mended a tear in one of her gloves. She kept the satchel in view. It reminded her that people crossed the cold roads in silence, leaning on small lights for survival. As dusk fell, she lit her lamp again and placed it near the window. The glow stretched across the snow. Footprints still marked the ground, half filled now by fresh flakes. She whispered to the empty room, "If you walk this road again, I leave the lamp burning." The wind pressed against the wall. The fire crackled. Clara rested her hands on her knees and breathed slow. The night brought stillness, but not loneliness. Winter moved around her, yet she held her place in it. Clara woke before sunrise with a pressure in her chest that told her the night had turned colder again. Frost clung to the edges of the window like thin lace. She sat up slow, letting her breath steady. The embers in the stove glowed faintly. She placed 2 small pieces of pine inside. The flame rose with soft yellow light. The satchel from the unknown traveller rested near the corner of the table. Clara touched it as she passed. The leather felt dry now, warm from the stove's steady heat. The note inside it stayed on the shelf beside her husband's letters, folded with care. She moved to the window and wiped the frost with her sleeve. The snow had drifted into tall ridges across the field. The footprints from the day before nearly vanished under fresh layers. Only faint depressions remained. Clara prepared warm water and drank slow. Her cough remained quiet this morning. The warmth soothed her throat. She dressed and wrapped her scarf tight before stepping outside. The air pressed sharp against her face. The sky held a pale grey tone that warned of more snowfall. Clara watched the horizon. No sign of travellers. Only the long white stretch of winter. She reached the hen. The hinges felt stiff, but she opened the door with steady pressure. The hens clucked softly. Clara fed them, brushed loose feathers from the floor, and checked their water for ice. When she stepped back outside, she noticed small tracks running near the cottage. Not human. A fox. Its paws left neat prints that circled the woodpile. Clara smiled faintly. The fox had visited often in earlier seasons. She hoped it found shelter near the trees. She returned inside and placed the wood basket near the stove. She took her husband's letter from the shelf and read it again. her eyes lingering on the lines about his plan to travel soon if winter eased. She touched the paper with slow care. A knock sounded at her door. Clara turned, her breath caught for a moment. She walked to the door and opened it. Morrow, the older man from the nearby cottage cluster, stood in the snow with his hat pulled low. His beard held frost. His shoulders looked tense. "Morning, Clara," he said. "Morning," Clara replied. "You walk early." "I check on neighbors," he said in a quiet tone. "Storm talks travel through the ridge. I want to see who holds enough wood." Clara stepped aside. "Come warm yourself." Morrow entered and removed his gloves. His hands looked rough from cold. Clara handed him warm water. He drank slow. "Your lamp shines each night," he said. "I saw it when I walked near the bend. Helps more people than you know." "I keep it lit for those who struggle on the road," Clara said. Morrow nodded. "Riders speak of it. Travelers speak of it. Even the mail rider said he looks for your window when storms press hard." Clara lowered her gaze. "I hope it guides them." Morrow looked toward the satchel near the table. "You had a visitor." Clara hesitated. "Someone passed near dawn yesterday. They left a note." "No name," Morrow frowned. "Did they ask for help?" "They said the lamp saved them," Clara replied. He stared at the floor for a moment. "Snow hides things. Men wander the ridge in winter. Not all seek shelter with kind hearts." Clara stiffened. "Do you think harm waits?" Morrow shook his head. "Not harm, hardship. Men, lost in storms, search for any light. They act without thought. They leave without words. This one thanked you. That speaks well." Clara felt some tension ease. He travelled on foot. He seemed worn. Morrow finished his drink. "If I hear talk of a lost traveller, I tell you." He rose. "Do you hold enough wood?" "Yes," Clara said. "I keep a steady pile." "Good," he replied. "Snow grows deeper soon. Stay watchful." Clara walked him to the door. "You walk safe." He nodded and stepped into the snow. His shape faded as he moved toward the trees. Clara closed the door and leaned against it with a slow breath. Morrow often offered guidance in winter. His words gave her comfort, even when they carried weight. She prepared her small tasks again. She mended a tear on her cloak. She swept the floor. She placed a pot of stew near the stove. She wiped frost from the window every hour, keeping her lamp lit even through daylight. Near midday, footsteps crunched outside. Clara rose and moved to the door. Henry stood there with a thin branch in his hand. "My mother says snow grows thicker near the creek," he said. "She says we stay close to home." "You listen to her," Clara replied. Henry looked toward the satchel on the table. "Did you find who left it?" "No," Clara said, "but the note thanked me." Henry stepped inside and stood near the stove. "I think he walks far from home." Clara nodded. "He feared waking me. He left without resting." Henry looked thoughtful for a moment. Sometimes tired men fear pausing. They fear sleeping and not waking. Clara studied him. His words held more weight than his young years. She placed a cup of warm water in his hands. "You speak with wisdom." He shrugged with shy pride. "My mother says hardships teach our thoughts." Clara smiled. "She teaches you well." Henry lifted the cup to his lips. "I wish to help again today." Clara shook her head. "Snow rises high. You stay near your home. Henry frowned. But you stay alone here. I stay steady, Clara replied. And your mother needs you near. Henry lowered his eyes. I understand. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. You walk by again tomorrow. If snow allows, we work together. Henry's face brightened. I will. He placed the empty cup on the table and stepped outside. Clara watched him move along the road toward the cottage cluster. His footsteps grew fainter as he walked away. Clara returned to her tasks. She continued mending, cleaning, and checking the stove. The hours moved with slow rhythm. By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened with thick grey clouds. She stood at the window. Heavy flakes began falling again. The wind rose with a low moan, pushing snow against the walls of the cottage. Clara lit her lamp early and placed it near the window. Shadows thickened across the fields. A shape appeared on the road. Clara leaned close to the glass. The falling snow blurred the figure. It moved slow, unsteady. She stepped back, lifted her shawl, and opened the door. The wind caught her breath at once. Sir, she called, come near the house. The figure staggered but continued forward. Clara rushed through the snow, holding her shawl tight against the wind. When she reached him, she saw a man with a thick coat and wool cap. His face was red from cold. His eyes held exhaustion. I saw the light, he said through choppy breaths. I followed it. Clara placed her arm around him. Come inside. He leaned on her heavily as they walked toward the cottage. When she closed the door behind them, he dropped onto the stool near the stove. I travelled from the ridge, he said. I lost the path twice. Clara poured warm water and handed it to him. Sip slow. He drank in small gulps. His hands trembled. She placed another log in the stove. The flame rose with steady warmth. The man looked around the cottage. Your lamp saves lives. Clara nodded. You rest here until the storm eases. He shook his head. I must reach the town. Supplies rest inside my pack. People wait. You walk when wind calms, Clara replied. Not before. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. I have walked since dawn. Clara checked his hands for frost. His fingers looked stiff but safe. She placed a blanket around his shoulders. What is your name? She asked. Whit, he said. Short for Whitfield. Clara nodded. I am Clara. He gave a soft nod. I thank you. She prepared stew and set a bowl in front of him. He ate slow, savouring each spoonful. When he finished, he sighed with deep relief. This warmth fills me, he said. You needed it, Clara said. The storm pressed harder against the walls. Snow slapped the window in thick sheets. Whit looked toward the sound. I thought the wind would keep me out forever, he said. You reached me, Clara replied. The road tries to push people back, but they find their way. Whit lifted his pack from the floor. Inside rests medicine. A small family in the southern cluster fell sick. Clara's chest tightened. How far away? 2 miles, Whit said. I must reach them before night. Not in this storm, Clara said. You rest until wind calms. Whit lowered his head. They depend on this. Clara thought for a moment. You sleep for a short while. When the wind softens, you walk with purpose. Whit nodded, though hesitation lingered on his face. Clara placed her husband's letter beside her on the shelf. She kept the satchel in view. The snow hammered the walls with fierce rhythm. Hours passed. Wit dozed near the stove. The wind shifted. The heavy roar softened to a low push. Clara stepped to the window and checked the sky. The snow still fell thick, but without the sharp lash. She shook Wit's shoulder. The storm gentles. He woke and rubbed his eyes. I finished the walk now. Clara handed him warm water and pressed the blanket around him once more. Stay close to the fence line. Follow the lamps of the cottages near the southern bend. Wit stood with effort. I owe you more than words. You owe me nothing, Clara said. Reach the family. He nodded and opened the door. The wind pushed against him, but he stepped forward with steady resolve. Clara watched him fade into the storm. She returned inside and shut the door. The cottage felt cold for a moment, but the stove warmed it again. Clara sat in her chair and let her breath calm. Her lamp glowed in the window. Travellers followed it. She stayed steady for them, for her husband, for the winter. Clara woke before dawn with a chill that pushed through her blanket. She sat up slow, rubbed her hands together, and listened. The stove held no ember. The fire died during the night. She moved quick but calm, adding thin pieces of pine and blowing soft until the flame returned. Warmth grew in small pulses. She held her palms near it until the sting of cold left her fingers. Snow pressed heavy against the door. She opened it with effort, pushing her shoulder against the drift. The sky held a deep blue shade, the kind that told her the night still lingered. The storm from the evening before had left the land buried under fresh weight. Branches bent low, some near breaking. Fence posts looked shorter, swallowed by rising snow. Clara stepped out far enough to breathe the sharp air. She pulled her scarf higher and studied the road. Wit's footprints stretched toward the bend but faded near the first ridge. She hoped he reached the southern cluster before the wind grew strong again. She wished for light to guide him. She returned inside and closed the door. The stove's flame grew steady. Clara placed a pot of water on top and settled into her chair. Her husband's letter rested under her palm. She lifted it and traced the first line. The familiar script steadied her nerves. She read the letter again, slow and careful. She wondered if he fought storms as fierce as this. She wondered if he watched lamps across far hills as she watched the road outside her window. By mid-morning, Clara prepared a small meal. She ate while watching snow slide from the roof. Each sound made her pause. Winter had a way of speaking through those shifts. Warning of breaks or hidden weight. Footsteps reached her ears. Not a knock, not the wind. Steady steps. Clara rose and moved to the door. When she opened it, Morrow stood there again. His coat held snow. His beard gathered ice. You woke early, Clara said. I check on Wit's path, Morrow replied. He passed my cottage before dawn. He walked strong. The storm slowed him, but he pushed on. Clara let out a slow breath. He carried medicine. Morrow nodded. He told me. I pointed him toward the southern ridge. If he kept his pace, he reached the family before dawn. Clara stepped aside. Come warm yourself. Morrow entered and sat near the stove. Clara handed him warm water. He wrapped his hands around the cup. You stand steady in this cold season. Morrow said, I stay with my tasks. Clara replied, You guide travellers, he said. Clara glanced at the lamp near the window. Light brings hope. Morrow kept his eyes on the stove. A rider from the northern post passed last night. He reached my cottage half frozen. he said. Storm winds pulled him off the ridge path. He followed your lamp for half a mile. Clara felt her breath pause. He reached shelter. He rests now, Morrow said. He told of 2 more travelers who lost their way, men on foot. One moved toward the forest. One stayed near the creek. Morrow lowered his voice. Storms in this region test all who cross these roads. Clara listened with quiet focus. You hold strength, Morrow said. But winter stays long this year. If you need help, you tell me. I will, Clara said. He stood and adjusted his coat. I check on the cluster again. Snow falls stronger by afternoon. Clara guided him to the door. He stepped outside and vanished behind a gust of white. She returned to her tasks. She prepared stew, mended a glove seam, and sorted logs by size. The hours passed slow. She lifted her lamp and set it near the window again as the sky thickened with low clouds. In the early afternoon, she heard light footsteps. When she opened the door, Henry stood there with snow piled on his shoulders. Mother sent me, he said. She wants you to know Whit reached the cluster. The family received their medicine. Relief washed through Clara. Good, they needed him. Henry nodded. He said he slept near the fire after he arrived. They fed him bread. He left at sunrise. Clara smiled. He holds strength in him. Henry stepped inside without waiting. Storm grows again. Clara poured warm water into a tin cup. Drink. Henry held the cup and looked around the cottage. The lamp shines brighter today. I cleaned the glass, Clara said. Storms blur the light. Henry sat on the stool. Mother says storms listen to lamps. She says they calm near warm glow. Clara smiled at his thought. Lamps help those who look for guidance. Henry watched the flame in the stove. Some say travelers from far villages plan to pass through soon. Roads close near the upper ridge. They search for safer paths. Do they carry supplies? Clara asked. Some, Henry said. Some walk empty-handed. Clara frowned. Winter pushes people to move harder than they should. Henry nodded. Mother says you stay strong for others. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. Your mother holds strong too. Henry finished his drink and rose. Mother said to return quick. Stay near your home, Clara said. Storm thickens. He wrapped his scarf higher and stepped outside. Clara watched him walk through rising snow. She returned to her tasks once more. She swept near the door and tightened the cloth near the windows to block drafts. She placed extra logs near the stove for the night. As dusk approached, wind rose with a stronger force. Snow whipped across the field. Clara lit her lamp again and placed it where it stayed bright at the window's edge. A sound cut through the storm. Hoofbeats. Clara stood at the window. A rider moved slow through the snow. The horse struggled with each step. Clara opened the door and stepped outside, lifting her lantern high. Here, she called. Come toward the house. The rider looked up weakly. He pressed his heels into the horse's sides, pushing it forward. Clara rushed through the snow to meet them. The horse snorted through frost. The rider slumped in the saddle. You come inside, Clara said. You rest here. He nodded with effort and slid from the saddle. Clara supported him as he stumbled toward the door. She guided the horse toward the sheltered side of the cottage before bringing the rider inside. He collapsed onto the stool, breath ragged. Snow pulled us off the road, he said between breaths. I feared losing my way. Clara placed warm water in his hands. Sip slow. He lifted the cup and swallowed small amounts. My name is She, he said. I carry letters. Some freeze in my satchel. I feared they would break apart if I kept writing. Clara's eyes widened. Do you hold letters from the southern routes? She nodded. I deliver north today. Storm blocked the ridge, so I moved through the low path. Did you pass the old quarry road? Clara asked. I did, he said. It held little shelter. Snow rose higher than my boots. Clara knelt near the stove and added a log. How long did you ride? Since dawn, she said. Horse tired. I tired with him. You rest here until wind softens, Clara said. She looked toward the window. Your lamp saved me. I saw it through the storm. Clara felt a swell of warmth in her chest. Many look for it. She set the cup down and reached for his satchel. He opened it carefully, pulling out a bundle of wrapped letters. I hold one for you, he said. Clara froze. Her breath caught. She reached out with trembling hands as she placed the letter in her palm. The familiar handwriting struck her heart at once. Her husband, her eyes softened. Her breath steadied. Thank you, she whispered. She closed the satchel. I deliver more once I rest. Riders trade shifts near the creek. They expect me soon, but storms delay us. Clara guided him toward the bed. Sleep here. Warm yourself. I should sleep near the stove, he said. You need rest, Clara insisted. The bed stays warm. She lowered himself onto the mattress. Thank you. Clara sat at the table and broke the seal on the letter. She unfolded the paper with care. Her husband wrote of clear skies in the southern region, frozen soil, steady work, and hope to travel north when roads eased. He wrote he missed her warmth. He wrote he held her in his thoughts each night. Clara's eyes filled. She held the letter close to her chest. Her breath steadied. She moved to the window and looked out at the storm. The lamp glowed through sweeping snow. For hours she sat in her chair, reading the letter again and again while she slept. The horse rested near the sheltered wall outside, protected from the harsh wind. As the night grew deep, the storm eased. Snowflakes slowed. The wind softened to a low hum. Clara placed her husband's letter beside the others. She touched the satchel from the unknown traveller, then rested her hand on the table. Outside, the lamp glowed across the quiet field. Travellers passed through this winter. Some lost, some searching, some carrying news that warmed the heart. Clara stayed steady. Through each storm she breathed slow and let the night settle around her. Clara woke with a deep chill running through her limbs. She pulled her shawl tight and sat upright, listening for the small sounds the cottage made when night turned into morning. The stove had dim embers glowing at the base, but no flame. She added thin strips of wood first, then a thicker log. She watched until the fire lifted into a slow, steady burn. The window held a thick frost that blurred the view outside. Clara wiped it with her sleeve and leaned close. The storm from the night before had left a deep blanket of snow reaching high up the fence posts. The road looked softened, as if winter pressed its hand on the whole landscape. No tracks showed. No signs of wit. No hints of travellers. Her breath eased. She whispered into the quiet room. He reached them. He must have. Clara checked her shelves. Her woodpile inside still held enough for a few days. She would gather more soon, though the drifts rose higher each morning. She took her kettle, filled it with snow, and placed it on the stove. When the water warmed, she drank slow. Her cough remained soft, though it pulled once at her chest. She waited for it to settle. As she dressed for the day, she thought of the family Whit intended to reach. 2 miles through winter could stretch into hours when snow rose heavy. She hoped he found them. She hoped his medicine restored someone's strength. Clara stepped outside. The cold struck hard, sharper than the days before. Her breath formed thick clouds in front of her. She knelt and brushed snow from the step, clearing a small space around the door. The woods held a quietness she had not heard in days. Even birds seemed to rest under the weight of winter. She walked toward the henhouse, pushing snow aside with her boots. The hens clucked faintly when she entered. Clara scattered feed and checked their water. Frost formed around the edges again. She broke the thin ice and replaced it with fresh, warm water. When she stepped back outside, she saw footprints leading from the road toward her cottage. Her pulse tightened. The prints looked recent. Not old enough to belong to Henry, not wide enough to belong to Morrow. These had a long stride. The edges were crisp. Not softened by wind, Clara followed them with slow caution. The tracks stopped halfway between the road and her fence, as if the person hesitated before approaching. Then the tracks turned back toward the road. Clara frowned. She moved closer to study them. Someone had walked toward her, stopped, then left without stepping nearer. No satchel this time. No message. No knock. She stepped back inside the cottage and shut the door behind her. She held her hands against the stove until warmth spread through her fingers. The thought of the unknown traveler brought a faint unease to her chest. She tried to steady her breath. Clara lifted the satchel from the shelf and held it for a moment. The note remained folded inside. She traced the crease with her thumb. Whoever left it had survived the storm, but someone else walked the road this morning. Hours passed with slow rhythm. Clara prepared small tasks to keep her mind steady. She mended the worn lining of her coat. She folded her blankets for the night. She prepared a small pot of stew for evening. Near midday, the wind grew strong. Snow lifted in swirling sheets across the fields. Clara set her lamp near the window again. She lit it early, though daylight still held the sky. Travelers needed light in weather like this. Even if no one reached her door, she kept the lamp burning. A faint sound echoed across the snow, a crunch of footsteps. A voice calling low, strained, trying not to shout. Clara stepped to the door and opened it. A young woman stood in the snow, holding something wrapped inside her coat. Her face looked pale from cold. Her boots were soaked, her gloves torn. "Please," the young woman said with a trembling voice. "I walked far. I need warmth for a moment." Clara stepped aside and guided her inside. The woman held her arms tight around her chest. Something shifted under her coat. Clara knelt beside her. "Sit by the stove. I bring water." The young woman sank onto the stool, shaking. Clara poured warm water into a cup and handed it to her. The woman held it in trembling hands and drank in slow sips. Clara spoke softly. "You traveled alone?" "Yes," the woman said. "I left early morning. The storm grew faster than I thought." Clara studied her face. Her cheeks held a harsh redness from wind. Her lips trembled from cold. "I am Clara," she said. The woman nodded. "I am Mara. Clara watched her cradle the wrapped bundle under her coat. She did not pry. "You warm it up?" Clara asked. Mara nodded. "I start to feel my hands again." Clara prepared a small bowl of stew and set it before her. Mara ate with slow, grateful movements. After a moment, Mara spoke again. "I walk from the far side of the ridge. My brother lies sick. The doctor said warm broth helps. I went to gather supplies from the nearest cottage cluster, but they had little left." Clara listened. "Your brother stays alone. He lies with neighbors near him," Mara said. "They try to help him breathe." Clara's chest tightened. "Illness travels fast in winter." Mara nodded and lowered her gaze. "The last rider who visited our cluster said medicine traveled toward us. But storms break every promise. I walked because waiting felt wrong." Clara thought of Wit. "A man passed through yesterday. He carried medicine for your cluster." Mara lifted her head quickly. "Wit, yes," Clara said. "He rested here. Then he left after the wind eased." Mara let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. "Then he reached us." "He must have reached us. He knows the southern path well." Clara felt her shoulders ease. "I hoped he arrived." Mara wiped a tear from her cheek. "If he reached my brother, he saved him." Clara placed her hand over Mara's for a brief moment. "He traveled with strong purpose." Mara hesitated before loosening her coat. Inside the shawl she carried, a baby slept with soft breaths. Clara stared for a moment, surprised by the small bundle. "You traveled with an infant?" Clara asked. Mara nodded. "He is my son. I could not leave him behind." Clara's heart tightened. "You walked through this storm holding him." Mara's voice softened. "He sleeps through the cold. But I feared stopping. I feared the wind turning harsher." Clara checked the baby's face. His cheeks looked warm, wrapped in thick layers. She lifted a small cloth and touched his forehead. He slept steady. "You stay here until the storm calms," Clara said. Mara shifted in her seat. "I should reach my brother." "You reach him when the wind softens," Clara replied. "Not sooner. Your son needs you steady." Mara closed her eyes for a moment, as if accepting the truth. Clara added another log to the stove. She moved blankets closer, preparing a resting place for Mara and her child. The fire crackled with warm sound. The storm thickened outside. Snow struck the window with sharp taps. Mara fed her child with trembling hands. Clara prepared extra broth and stored it for the road ahead. As the storm raged, faint voices carried through the wind. A distant calling. Someone shouting in strained bursts. Clara stood and moved to the window. Shapes moved near the road. 2 men, one carrying another on his back. They struggled through snow up to their thighs. Clara opened the door and waved her lamp high. "Here," she called. The men stumbled toward the cottage. When they reached the door, Clara guided them inside. One man collapsed onto the floor, breathless and shaking. The man who carried him dropped to his knees. Exhausted, Clara helped them remove their ice-covered coats. Mara stood, holding her baby close, watching with wide eyes. The first man whispered, "We found him near the creek. He fell through thin ice." Clara's chest tightened. "Bring him close to the stove." They lifted the fallen man and placed him near the heat. His clothes soaked through. His skin held a grey tint. Clara moved fast. She poured warm water, rubbed his hands, and placed blankets over his legs. The stove glowed warm, slow, steady. Mara stepped forward and handed Clara a dry cloth. Clara nodded in thanks and pressed it against the man's forehead. The man who carried him breathed slow, recovering. "We looked for help. We saw your lamp through the storm." Clara felt something inside her steady. "You reached the right place." The storm roared outside. Inside, the room filled with warmth, breath, and fragile hope. Hours passed. The fallen man's breathing grew stronger. Mara's baby slept in her arms. The other rescuers rested near the fire. Clara moved among them, handing water, checking blankets, tending the stove. Near dawn, the storm weakened. The wind no longer pushed against the walls with anger. The snow fell in softer layers. The rescued man opened his eyes. Clara leaned close. "You rest safe now," he whispered. "Your lamp saved me." Clara nodded. "It saves many." He closed his eyes again, but with more strength than before. As the morning light rose, Clara stepped to the window. The snow looked deep, hard, relentless, but her lamp still glowed. She whispered, "I keep it lit for all who walk this road." Clara woke before the others, her eyes opening to the soft crackle of the stove and the faint breaths of the people resting around her cottage. The rescued man lay near the fire, with blankets piled high over his chest. Mara slept in the chair, her baby against her shoulder. The two men who brought the fallen traveller dozed near the wall, their faces slack with exhaustion. Clara rose slow, careful not to disturb them. She added 2 small logs to the stove. The fire brightened, brushing the room with warm gold. She moved to the window and wiped away the frost. Dawn pressed through a pale sky that looked strained and hollow, as if winter used too much strength in the storm. The snow lay deep, higher than the doorstep. No one walked a road like this unless forced by need. Clara pressed her palm against the glass. The world outside looked still, cold but not wild. A thin calm held the morning. She turned as Mara stirred. The young woman blinked through sleep, checked her baby, then rose slow. "Did he wake?" Mara whispered, nodding toward the rescued man. "Once," Clara said. He slipped back to rest. Mara touched her son's small hand. The storm sounded endless. Clara nodded. But storms end. One of the rescuers lifted his head, rubbing his eyes. His voice came low. He breathed stronger. "You gave him safe hours." Clara placed a kettle on the stove. "Warm water helps all of us this morning." As she prepared cups, the rescued man shifted under the blankets. His eyes opened, still fogged with weakness. Clara knelt beside him. "You are safe," she said. "You fell through ice. You need rest." He swallowed. "I remember the cold pulling me under. I thought it finished me." "You survived because your friends reached you fast," Clara said. The man beside him shook his head. "We almost lost his tracks. Snow covered them. Then we saw your lamp through the drift." Clara placed a cup of warm water beside the rescued man. He lifted it with shaking hands. He drank slow, stopping once to breathe. "I thank you," he whispered. Clara nodded. "Warm yourself." Strength returns slow. Mara stepped forward. "When the storm cleared, I prayed someone else reached shelter." Clara studied her for a moment. "You and your son sleep a few more hours. The road waits." Mara shook her head gently. "My brother waits first." Clara checked the baby's face. His cheeks looked warm, his breaths soft. The rescued man coughed once, weak but steady. Clara wrapped another blanket around him. She stood to check her woodpile inside. The stack had shrunk during the night. The stove needed steady tending with so many people depending on its warmth. She stepped outside with a basket. The cold clung to her cheeks. She pushed her boots through tall drifts. The sky stretched pale. Winter softened the edges of the fields. Clara reached the woodpile and brushed snow from the logs. She lifted as many as the basket held and carried them inside. When she returned, Mara stood feeding her child. The rescuers spoke low between themselves. The rescued man slept again, his breathing stronger. Clara placed the wood beside the stove. She moved to the table, cut pieces of bread, and passed them to the others. Mara ate with slow bites. The men thanked Clara. Their voices held relief. As the hours passed, the cottage warmed. Strength returned to tired limbs. The rescued man sat upright for the first time since he arrived. Clara guided him to drink another cup. "Do not rush," she said. "You walk when you hold steady breath." He nodded. "My feet still feel numb." "Keep them near the stove," Clara said. Warm spread slow. He rested his hands on his knees and stared at the flickering flame. I remember sinking. Snow above me, water below. Silence everywhere. Clara placed a hand on his blanket. "You reached air. That is what matters." He nodded, his eyes soft with gratitude. Later in the morning, Morrow arrived. Clara saw him through the window, his figure pushing through deep drifts. She stepped outside to greet him. His beard held frost, and he breathed heavy. "You hold half the ridge in your cottage," he said with a strained smile. Clara nodded. They needed warmth. "Word travels fast," Morrow said. "Two men said they saw your lamp from the creek. They followed it when the wind broke. They reached safety," Clara said. Morrow stepped inside, eyeing the rescued man. "You found trouble, I see." The man nodded. "Ice cracked. I slipped." Morrow knelt. "You stay still. You live because luck held you." "Luck and Clara," one of the rescuers said. Morrow looked at Clara with respect. "Your lamp guides more than travelers. It keeps men alive." Clara felt her cheeks warm. Morrow straightened. "Storm forgives no one. Another builds past the ridge." Clara frowned. "Strong." "Yes," Morrow said. "It moves quick." Before nightfall, Clara glanced at her guests. "You must leave soon." The rescued man tried to stand, but faltered. Clara caught his arm. "You rest until midday," she said. "Then you walk with care." Mara held her sleeping child tighter. "I leave before the next storm reaches us." Clara nodded. "You walk with others." "Not alone," Morrow stepped forward. "I guide her. The cluster sits on my route." The rescuers exchanged looks. "We take him home," one said, nodding toward the man who fell through the ice. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter. "All of you eat before leaving." She prepared broth and bread. The cottage filled with warm scent. Mara stood by the window, rocking her baby. The rescuers ate with slow gratitude. The rescued man drank broth while leaning against the wall. Morrow approached Clara, his voice lowered. "You stay careful here. Tracks by your fence appeared again last night." Clara's breath caught. "I saw them." "You know the ridge folk," Morrow said. "Some wander in storms. Some look for warmth. Some avoid doors. They pass through like ghosts. Clara glanced at the satchel on the shelf. One thanked me. Then he holds good heart, Morrow said. But winter changes people. Stay watchful. Clara nodded. When midday approached, the rescued man stood with effort. Morrow steadied him. Mara wrapped her child tight, her eyes bright with determination. The rescuers prepared their packs. Clara handed each of them a small piece of bread for the road. You walk along the fence line, she said. Follow the lamps of the cottages near the southern bend. Do not drift from the path. Mara clutched Clara's coat sleeve. Your warmth saves more than you know. Clara placed her hand on Mara's. You keep your son close. Mara nodded and stepped outside with Morrow. The rescuers followed, with the weakened traveller between them. The snow reached high up their legs, but the sky held clearer light now. Clara stood in the doorway, watching them move down the road. Their figures faded slowly into the white. She closed the door and stepped back inside. The cottage fell quiet. She tidied blankets, cleared cups, and wiped melted snow from the floor. The silence felt warm, not empty. She lifted her husband's letter and read it once more. His words steadied her. She moved to the window and lit her lamp again. The flame glowed steady in the dim afternoon light. Outside, the world stretched cold and wide. Clara felt a soft pull of solitude mixed with quiet strength. The lamp's glow reached far across the snow. She whispered, I keep it bright for those who search. She turned back to the stove and added another log. The fire answered with gentle crackles. The afternoon drifted on. Snow softened. The wind held stillness. Clara prepared small tasks to pass the hours. She mended a loose hem on her skirt. She folded fresh blankets. She swept near the door. Late in the day, a soft sound touched her ears. A knock, quiet, hesitant. Clara froze. She stepped to the door and opened it. A man stood outside. Not Mara, not Morrow, not the rescuers. His coat looked worn, his face tired, his breath heavy, but his eyes held a look she knew. Her husband. Clara gasped and stepped forward. He caught her in his arms, shaking with exhaustion. I walked through 3 storms, he whispered. I saw your lamp. Clara pressed her hand to his cheek. You reached home, he nodded. I followed your light through every mile. She guided him inside. He sank onto the chair with a deep breath. She brought water to him. He drank slow, his hands trembling. I thought snow would keep me from reaching you. He said, voice low. You found me, Clara said. He looked around the cottage, then at her face. I heard travellers speak of your lamp. I prayed it stayed lit. When I saw it through the ridge, I knew I lived. Clara steadied her breath. I kept it burning for you. Her husband reached for her hand. She held it tight. Outside, snow drifted in soft layers. Inside, the fire glowed warm. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, her heart steady for the first time in many nights. Clara held her husband's hand for a long moment, letting the warmth return to him slow. His coat dripped melted snow onto the floor. His boots sagged with heavy ice. His breath came in thick bursts as he leaned back in the chair. Clara knelt to loosen his laces, her fingers moving with soft care. You travelled far, she said. He nodded and brushed frost from his beard. I started south. Snow rose higher with each mile. Storms closed the route twice. A rider told me you kept a lamp lit every night. I followed the talk like a path. Clara looked up at him with steady eyes. I waited for you. He reached down, touched her cheek, and breathed out slow. I thought winter silenced the road, but then I saw a faint glow. It felt close enough to reach. Clara guided him toward the stove. He lowered himself onto the floor and held his hands near the warmth. His fingers trembled, thawing slow. Clara placed another log inside the stove. "Tell me," she said, keeping her voice soft, "where did the storms catch you?" "Near the ridge first," he said. "Wind pushed hard. I hid behind rocks until the worst passed. Then another storm found me near the creek. I lost the path. Snow took my tracks. I feared turning in the wrong direction and walking in circles." Clara placed warm water in his hands. "Drink." He took small sips. Steam rose around his face. "I remember the stories of your lamp. Travelers spoke of it. They said a warm light waited near the old fence, guiding anyone who drifted." Clara sat beside him. "I kept it near the window every night." He lifted her hand. "It brought me home." She leaned her forehead against his. For a moment, the cottage fell into quiet calm. The stove crackled. Snow brushed the window. A soft warmth filled the space between them. Clara rose and reached for a dry blanket. She wrapped it around his shoulders. "Rest now. Your legs shake." He sank against the chair. "My body fights the cold still." Clara prepared broth. As it warmed on the stove, she checked her woodpile. It had grown low after the long night with guests. She would gather more soon. When the broth finished, she poured a bowl and placed it in his hands. He ate slow. Each spoonful seemed to steady him. When he finished, he looked around the cottage. "You had people inside here last night?" Clara nodded. "A woman named Mara with her child. 2 men who rescued a neighbor from the creek. And before them, Wit, who carried medicine. Her husband set the empty bowl aside. This cottage turns into a small refuge." Clara smoothed her skirt. "The storms kept pushing people here. They saw the lamp and walked." He smiled, though his eyes held deep exhaustion. "You saved them. They saved each other," Clara said. "I offered warmth." He studied her for a moment. "You stayed strong." Clara lowered her gaze. "I held fear sometimes. You kept the lamp burning," he said. "That takes strength." Clara stood and began clearing the scattered blankets from the night. Her husband watched her with quiet admiration, tracing each familiar movement. After a moment, he stood with slow effort. "Sit," Clara said. "You rest." He shook his head. "I help." She wanted to insist he rested, yet she knew he needed to regain his footing through movement. She handed him a folded blanket. He draped it across the chair. He gathered the empty cups near the stove. His hands steadied with each task. After a while, he sat again, breathing easier. Clara joined him, sitting across from him on the floor. "Tell me more. Where did you sleep during the storms?" "Under an old shed roof once," he said. The boards shook with each gust. I stayed awake through the night. Another night I found an empty storeroom in a small cluster. A kind woman gave me a lantern and bread. I pushed through snow with the lantern raised high. Clara tucked her hands under her shawl. "I worried. I knew you did," he said. "Your letters told me how winter deepened here." Clara lifted her chin. "I kept your last letter near me each night." He looked at the shelf where the letters rested in a bundle. "I wrote another one. I tried to send it, but the rider said the route closed." Clara felt a soft ache in her chest. You brought your words with you instead. He smiled gently. I did. The afternoon pressed forward in slow rhythm. Clara prepared tea. Her husband rested in the chair, soaking warmth into his bones. Outside, the sky shifted from pale grey to muted silver. Snow softened into faint flakes, drifting down like quiet threads. Clara stood and moved to the window. She traced the frost with her fingertip. Another storm grows. He joined her at the window, standing close. I saw dark clouds forming behind me. Clara pressed her forehead against the glass. The ridge swallows sunlight faster each day. He placed a hand on her back. But we have time before it reaches us. Clara nodded. I gather wood before dusk. I help, he said. You rest, she replied firmly. He looked at her with stubborn affection. We gathered together. Clara studied his face. He looked thin, tired, but steady. She relented. We gather slow. They wrapped themselves in their thickest coats. Clara handed him a spare scarf. They stepped outside. The cold pressed sharp across their cheeks. Snow reached high on both sides of the cottage door. Clara led the way toward the woodpile. They walked through deep layers. Her husband followed, his boots sinking heavily into the snow. He breathed hard but kept pace. At the woodpile, they brushed loose snow from the logs. Clara lifted the smaller pieces first. Her husband grabbed thicker logs. They filled the basket until both of them strained. As they turned back toward the cottage, wind gathered low along the ground. Snow swirled in small loops. Clara held the basket close to her chest and moved with careful steps. When they reached the door, Clara's husband pressed his hand against the wall of the cottage. This place holds strength. I felt it even before stepping inside. Clara opened the door and led him inside. Warmth washed across their faces at once. They set the basket near the stove. Shaking snow from their sleeves, her husband sat near the fire again, stretching his fingers toward the heat. When I walked through the ridge last night, I saw faint signs of others nearby. Lights far off. Voices carried through the wind. I feared they were warnings. Clara knelt beside him. Some wandered here earlier. A man left a satchel and a note. He watched from the window before leaving. Her husband stiffened slightly. He watched from the window. He feared knocking, Clara said. He thanked me for the lamp. Her husband breathed slow. Winter pushes men to strange places. He held no harm. No, Clara said. Only tired steps. Her husband nodded, tension easing from his shoulders. As evening settled, the two of them worked side by side. Clara prepared vegetables from her small store. Her husband cut small pieces of dried meat into the pot. The stew simmered through the quiet hours. Clara set 2 bowls on the table. They ate in silence at first, letting warmths settle into them. After a long moment, her husband spoke. I missed this. Clara lifted her eyes. Sharing a table. Sharing quiet, he said. Sharing warmth. Sharing winter with you. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His fingers curled round hers with gentle weight. You stay home through this storm, Clara said. You rest from travel. He nodded. I stay as long as winter allows. Clara felt a soft relief. Winter holds strong here. He gave a faint smile at her words. Then I rest strong here. After supper, Clara moved to the window and lit her lamp again. Her husband watched the glow settle into the snow outside. Travelers will follow it, he said. Clara nodded. They always do. He stepped beside her. You guide them. You held this place alone. I see your strength. Clara felt warmth rise at his words, deep and steady. The night pressed thick around the cottage. Clara added more logs to the stove. Her husband leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. She watched him breathe, slow and steady, safe in the warmth of their home. Later, Clara wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He stirred awake but did not speak. She guided him toward the bed. He hesitated. You sleep too, he said. Clara nodded. Soon he lay down, his breath softening. Clara watched him rest, her heart easing in quiet waves. She returned to the window. The lamp glowed steady through the frost. Snowflakes drifted down in slow spirals. The road outside lay silent. Clara whispered, "He reached me." The storms did not stop him. She turned back toward the bed, her steps soft across the wooden floor. She lay beside him and closed her eyes. The stove crackled. The lamp glowed. Winter pressed close but gentle dot. Clara slept with her husband beside her for the first time in many long nights. Clara woke to a soft stillness that felt deeper than the days before. The stove held a faint orange glow. Her husband slept beside her, his breath slow and steady. She lay still for a moment, letting the warmth of his presence reach her after so many nights spent waiting. She touched his hand. His fingers curled toward hers with quiet trust. She rose carefully so he would sleep longer. The floor felt cold against her feet. She wrapped her shawl tight and moved to the stove, adding to logs with slow care. The flame rose and filled the room with a warm hush. Outside, the world held a pale grey light. Frost pressed into the corners of the window. Clara wiped the glass and looked outside. Snow shaped tall drifts around the fence. The road looked buried, but a thin mark cut through the surface, like someone had walked during the night. She leaned closer, squinting. One set of prints. Long stride. Not from her husband. Not from Henry. Not from Morrow. Someone passed quietly before dawn. She stepped back from the window. She listened. Only the stove crackled. She touched her chest and let her breath settle. Winter always pushed strangers toward any sign of warmth. Last night's visitor might have been someone searching for shelter, but turning back after seeing the lamp, Clara reached for her kettle and filled it with snow. As it melted on the stove, her husband stirred and opened his eyes. "You're awake," Clara said. He blinked slow. "Your fire woke me. It feels warmer than anything I remember from the road." Clara handed him a cup of warm water. "Drink, your strength returns steady." He sat upright, his joints stiff from the long travel. "You kept the stove strong through the night." "I woke twice to add wood," Clara said. "Old habits." He reached out and touched her hand. "I'm grateful." Clara gave a faint smile before rising to check her shelves. She counted her logs. The pile would last 2 more days if she rationed it. Today she needed to gather more. The next storm would move in soon. Her husband rose from the bed and stepped toward the window. Clouds spread across the ridge. "More snow soon." "Yes," Clara said. "We gather wood before midday." He looked toward the road. "There are prints." "I saw," Clara said. Someone walked past. He narrowed his eyes. "Did they knock?" "No," Clara replied. "Did they leave anything?" "No note," she said. "No satchel." He rested his hand on the window frame. Someone stops here each day now, because the lamp draws them, Clara said. He looked at her with quiet pride. You stayed strong without me. Clara lowered her gaze. Strength grows when needed. He stepped closer. You carried this cottage through storms. Clara lifted her chin. We faced a day together. They shared a brief silence, heavy with relief and quiet gratitude. After a simple breakfast of warm oats and the last piece of bread Henry's mother sent, they prepared to go outside. Clara wrapped her shawl tight. Her husband tied his scarf round his neck and pulled on thick gloves. When they stepped outside, snow met them with sharp cold. The sky looked heavy but not wild. They pushed through drifts toward the woodpile. Clara cleared the space around the logs while her husband lifted the heavier pieces as they worked. A distant crunch of snow reached their ears. Clara lifted her head. Someone approached from the far curve of the road. A single figure, slow, bent slightly forward. Her husband straightened, his breath forming a white cloud. Another visitor. Clara held her breath until the figure came close enough for her to see the coat. It was Morrow. His shoulders sagged, and his hat hung low over his forehead. Morrow, Clara called. He lifted a hand. Morning. If we still call it morning through all this winter. Clara moved through the snow to meet him. You walked early. I check on folk, he said, his breath uneven. Storm shapes itself behind the ridge. It grows wider than the last one. Her husband stepped forward. Do we have hours or less? Hours, Morrow said, but not many. Snow presses through the valley. Wind gathers near the creek. Clara looked toward the horizon. We gather more wood. Morrow nodded. You do that, and keep the lamp bright. People speak of it. They trust it. Clara glanced at her husband. He smiled faintly. Morrow rubbed his hands together. I came with news. Wit reached a sick child. Medicine helped. The boy breathes stronger now. Clara's chest eased. Mara will find peace. He left before dawn, Morrow said. Walked back toward the ridge to reach another family. He said Clara's lamp gave him strength to keep going. Clara touched her shawl. I hope he stays safe. Morrow nodded once more before turning toward the road. Storm pulls me back home. You both stay steady. We will, Clara said. Clara and her husband watched him walk away until the snow swallowed his shape. Her husband placed his hand on her shoulder. Your lamp reaches farther than any rider. She looked toward her window. Winter needs light. They finished gathering wood and returned inside. Clara stacked the logs near the stove. Her husband rubbed his hands together, warming them. Hours passed with calm routine. Clara swept the floor and prepared broth. Her husband mended a broken latch on the door. He worked slowly, careful not to strain himself. Each time their hands brushed, a quiet warmth settled between them. The afternoon turned quiet. Heavy clouds gathered at the horizon. Clara sat near the window for a moment, watching snow fall in soft sheets. A faint sound reached her ears, a distant cry. She stood at once. Did you hear? Clara asked. Her husband turned. What was it? A call, Clara said. Far. He stepped beside her. We go look. Clara grabbed her shawl. He grabbed his coat. They stepped outside and moved toward the fence. The wind pushed against them. The sound came again, faint but clear enough to guide them. They followed it to the bend where the road dipped low. snow piled high on each side. At the bottom of the dip, a small sled leaned against a tree. A woman knelt beside it, her hands trembling. Clara hurried forward. "Are you hurt?" The woman lifted her head with wide, frantic eyes. "My mother?" She collapsed. I tried to pull her through the snow, but the sled stuck. I shouted for help. Clara and her husband rushed down the slope. A woman lay on the sled, her eyes closed, her face pale, her breath shallow. Clara touched her forehead. "She holds a fever." The daughter wiped tears from her eyes. "She fell at dawn." I tried to get her to the town doctor. Clara looked at her husband. "We bring her to the cottage." He nodded. Together, they lifted the sled from the snow and guided it back toward the cottage. The wind pressed hard against them. Clara's husband held the front, pulling with steady force. Clara and the daughter lifted the sides. Snow rose around their legs as they moved. When they reached the cottage, Clara pushed the door open with her shoulder. They guided the sled inside and lifted the older woman onto a blanket near the stove. Clara knelt beside her. "Fetch snow for water," she told her husband. He hurried outside. Clara pressed her hand to the older woman's cheek. The skin felt warm, almost hot. The daughter knelt beside her, sobbing into her hands. "She has been weak since last week," the daughter said. I feared waiting any longer. Clara placed a hand on her shoulder. "You reached us." We warm her. Her husband returned with snow. Clara melted it in the kettle, then dipped a cloth into the warm water and pressed it against the older woman's forehead. The daughter held her hand. "Mother, stay with me." Clara checked her breath, weak but steady. She prepared broth and lifted a spoon toward the woman's lips. The older woman swallowed faintly. The storm outside pushed harder against the walls. The window rattled. Snow brushed in heavy waves. Clara's lamp glowed through the frost. A lone guide in the thickening afternoon, her husband sat beside Clara and helped hold the woman upright as she drank small sips. The daughter whispered soft encouragement, brushing her mother's hair away from her face. As the hours passed, warmth returned to the older woman's cheeks. Her breath steadied. Her eyes opened in brief moments. Clara kept the cloth cool and fresh. The daughter stayed close, whispering to her with soft tenderness by dusk. The woman's strength grew enough for her to sit upright against the wall with support. "She breathes easier," Clara said. The daughter nodded fiercely. "You saved her." Clara shook her head. "You brought her through snow. You kept her alive." Her husband leaned forward. "You both stay here through the storm." The daughter nodded. "We do not risk the road again tonight." Clara guided them toward the bed. The mother lay down with slow care. The daughter settled beside her. Holding her hand, Clara moved to the window. The lamp's glow pushed through the storm in strong light. Her husband stepped behind her, his arm brushing hers. "You guide more lives than you know," he said. Clara touched the glass. "I guide those winter sends." He nodded. "And now you guide me to—" Clara turned and pressed her forehead to his. "You reached me through storms. That is enough." Night settled thick across the fields. The older woman slept in steady breaths. Her daughter lay beside her. Clara and her husband sat near the stove, sharing warm broth. Outside, snow pressed against the door. Inside, warmth held them in quiet peace. Clara kept her lamp lit through the night, its flame steady, its glow stretching across the buried road. Clara woke before dawn. The cottage lay in deep stillness. Only the soft breath of the older woman and the quiet shift of blankets broke the silence. Her husband slept upright in the chair, his chin on his chest, arms folded tight. Clara watched him for a moment. His face looked calmer than the night before. She felt a slow warmth rise in her chest. She moved toward the stove and added 2 logs. The fire responded with low crackles. Light spread across the room. The daughter stirred and looked toward her mother at once. Clara stepped closer. She rests steady, Clara whispered. The daughter nodded, relief softening her features. Her breath stayed even through the night. Clara checked the older woman's forehead. The fever lowered. Her skin felt less hot. Clara dipped a cloth into warm water and pressed it against her brow. The daughter let out a long breath. When she collapsed on the road, I feared she would not survive. You walked far, Clara said. Your strength kept her moving. The daughter lowered her eyes. I followed a small hope that someone lived along this ridge. Clara looked toward the window, where the lamp glowed through frozen frost. People follow the lamp. Winter sends them here. The daughter grasped Clara's hand. You kept us alive. Clara shook her head. This cottage holds warmth for all. Her husband shifted in the chair. His eyes opened slow. Clara stepped toward him. You slept little, she said. He rubbed his eyes. Your fire let me rest. My legs still hold a dull ache from the road. Clara placed a cup of warm water in his hands. Drink. He took slow sips, watching the older woman rest. She strengthens. Yes, Clara said. Her fever breaks. He gave a small nod, then looked toward the window. Snow pressed against the glass in thick layers. Outside, the storm from yesterday had grown heavy. The sky held a muted glow as morning spread through the ridge. Clara moved to the door. She opened it only enough to look outside. Snow rose higher than her knees. The wind pressed slow but steady. The world lay buried. The storm passed in the night but left a deep stillness behind. She stepped outside with care. The cold wrapped around her in sharp weight. She gathered a small handful of snow and held it up to the light. It sparkled pale blue under the weak sky. The world looked clean and silent, as if winter pressed a hand over all sound. Her husband joined her at the doorway. The road stays hidden. People stay inside today. Clara nodded. No one travels through snow this high. He stepped beside her, gazing over the field. I walked through storms worse than this, but I feel safe here. Clara reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. They returned inside. Clara prepared warm broth for everyone. The daughter lifted her mother and helped her sip. The older woman opened her eyes briefly, offering Clara a weak but grateful look. Rest, Clara said. Strength returns in quiet. The woman nodded faintly and lay back. Clara's husband took the seat near the stove and began repairing. A loose hinge on the cupboard. She watched his hands work slow and steady, the way she remembered from summers before all this winter sickness spread through the region. She listened to each soft tap and felt something settle inside her. She moved through the cottage with calm purpose. She swept the floor. She folded blankets from the night. She placed fresh water in a bowl near the stove for washing. Time passed in gentle rhythm. Late in the morning, the daughter stepped beside Clara. When the next clear day comes, we walk back home. My mother stays stronger. We wait for the right time. Clara nodded. You stay until the road shapes firm again. Winter shifts each hour. The daughter looked toward the lamp. Your light reached us long before we reached your door. Clara touched the lamp's frame. It stays lit until spring. Clara's husband approached them. His voice stayed low. You both keep strength. The road home waits when the sky opens. The daughter nodded. As midday approached, the older woman sat up with steady breaths. Clara helped her drink more broth and wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders. The woman's eyes held gratitude that needed no words. Clara's husband stepped toward the window. Clouds thin. Sky breaks toward the east. Clara joined him. A faint line of soft silver light appeared where the horizon opened. Snow glittered across the ground. A gentle peace settled over the ridge. Storm passed, Clara said. For now, her husband replied. Winter still holds the valley tight. Clara nodded, but the worst pulled back. He placed a hand on her back. You guide this cottage through all of it. Clara breathed slow and steady. We guide it now. They shared a quiet moment, careful and warm. Later, Clara prepared tea for everyone. She placed the cups on the table. The daughter helped her mother sit beside her. Clara's husband pulled the last chair closer. The older woman held her cup with trembling hands. Your home gave me breath. Snow tried to silence me. Clara touched her shoulder. You reached shelter. That saved you. You and your lamp saved me, the woman whispered. Clara lowered her eyes. The lamp waits for all. Her husband watched Clara with soft respect. As afternoon settled, they shared stories to pass the hours. The daughter spoke of her home near the valley, where a small orchard lay silent under frost. The older woman spoke of her childhood winters, when storms arrived without warning and her mother kept soup warm on the hearth at all hours. Clara's husband spoke of the road, behind him and the riders who helped him through the worst parts of the ridge. Clara listened with her hands resting in her lap, her heart steady. When the light outside grew pale and long, Clara stood and placed her hand on the window frame. Her lamp glowed steady through the frost. Someone walks toward it, her husband said. Sometimes no one comes, Clara said. Sometimes 10. They follow warmth, he said. Clara nodded. Winter teaches us to share what we hold. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulder. You gave warmth to strangers, and you kept a place for me. Clara leaned against him, allowing herself the softness of the moment. The daughter stood near the stove with her mother. When the road opens, we return home, but we leave grateful hearts here. Clara offered a small smile. That is enough. Night settled slow across the ridge. Clara prepared supper. Her husband helped serve each bowl. They ate together in calm silence. After supper, the daughter helped her mother settle onto the bed again. Clara added more logs to the stove. The fire glowed brighter, touching the walls with warm light. Her husband stepped behind her. You rest soon. Soon, Clara said. I watched the lamp a bit longer. He placed a soft kiss on her temple. I wait for you. Clara stayed at the window for a few minutes. The lamp shone through the cold night, steady and strong. The road looked empty, but peace filled the silence. She whispered, This ridge holds us safe tonight. She turned from the window and walked to the bed. Her husband lifted the blanket for her. She settled beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her with quiet strength. The stove crackled. Snow fell in slow, gentle flakes outside. The older woman breathed steady. The daughter slept beside her. The cottage held warmth in every corner. Clara closed her eyes and let her body relax against her husband. She felt safe. She felt home. She felt the deep quiet of a winter night that brought people together under one roof. Guided by a single steady lamp, she whispered, "We reached the end of this cold season." Her husband pressed his forehead against hers. We reached it together. The cottage softened into sleep. Winter pressed against the walls, but warmth filled every breath inside. Thank you for resting with this story. I hope your body feels quiet and warm now. Our next tale will follow another traveler through winter nights and long roads. I prepared a small gift for you, a short audio of slow nighttime sounds to calm your breath. Rest deep tonight. I wait for you in the next story.